Welcome, Tim, to my podcast. I'm so happy to have you on here to talk to you about your book. I love the title of your book, 7 Steps to Manage Ego Problems, the how-to guide for somebody else. So before we get into this conversation, let's talk about who is Tim Allston, for those who don't know you.
Well, thank you very much, Chastity. And it's a pleasure to be here with Purposefilled Butterfly. I am a person like everybody else who struggles and has struggled with either arrogance or low and no esteem. Struggle with both of them together at the same time. And God revealed to me that while everybody is struggling with this, you, Tim, are going to be the one to write about it. Because it is I've blessed you with the gift of writing and communicating, and this will help to save a lot of people, starting with you. And so, as opposed to being one who is excessive with alcohol, which would make me an alcoholic, and instead of being excessive with work, which would make me a workaholic. And if I asked your husband, he would probably say that you are excessive with shopping, which makes you a shopaholic. God has shown me that I have been excessive with my ego. And so I'm not a workaholic, shopaholic, or alcoholic. I am an egoholic. But thanks be to God, I'm now recovering.
So who did you write this book for? And I'm gonna say one thing off the book. I am not a shopaholic. So if you ask my husband, he would not tell you that. So that's a good thing about being married to me. I don't shop that much. So if I do shop, it's on clearance or on sale. Okay. But but who did you write this book for? Because I mean, when you think about, when we look around, like even on Instagram and this around us, you see a lot, we live in an egocentric society, I would say. So, yes. You have some people who are, all about themselves and stuff like that. But then I like how you kind of talk about the low ego too, where, you have people who don't really believe in themselves as well. So like, who is your audience, for this?
Well, Chastity, that's an excellent point. There are people all around us who think a lot of themselves or think very little of themselves. And that could be us at any given period of time during the day. And so every single dictionary defines ego as one's sense of self. So there's nothing wrong with having an ego. You're supposed to have an ego. God created us with an ego, with a sense of self. The challenge comes in is when God, who created this ego in us, when sin separated us from God, and there was this perfect union of us and God, when we separated from God, and then when we began to lean on our own understanding, because you see, as the Bible says, there is a balance, Chastity, between God and us. And only God knows the correct calculation, the correct calibration between him and us. When we don't seek out God, and when we try to do it all ourselves and put too much of ourselves in, then that creates the arrogance, the conceit, the boastfulness. And then there are those times, on the other hand, when we put too little of ourselves in, and that creates the low and no esteem, the feelings of inadequacy. Only God knows the correct admixture, and he dispenses it to us in a measure proportion to our faith. So what is egoholism? Egoholism is thinking too highly of yourself or thinking too little of your God and then acting excessively upon it.
Oh, I like that. I really love that definition. So tell me when you first realized that you had an ego problem, like kind of like walk me through the process of when you realized, hey, I got an issue, and what made you say, you know what, enough is enough, it's time for a change?
Well, as I say in the book, I was away in college. I was attending Hampton Institute, which is now Hampton University. And my parents had wanted me to come to my mother's alma mater and your alma mater, which was Oakwood College.
Oakwood.
Yeah. But I was having so much fun at Hampton, doing this, doing that, being in this leadership position, getting ready to pledge fraternity, this, that, and the other. And my mother said to me, I'll never forget, it was a conversation back in December 1973.
Mm-hmm.
She said, you can't see yourself at little bitty Oakwood. We don't have all of the glitz and glamour that Hampton has.
Mm-hmm.
She said, your problem is your ego.
Mm-hmm.
Bang.
Mm.
I had never heard it like that before. And I spent decades running away from that characterization. So finally, it hit me. I tell the story in Essence magazine. I had just left Oakwood to start my own business, start my own public relations consulting firm, had just gotten a major contract from a technology company in Huntsville. And within 6 weeks, I lost the contract.
Mm.
And at that Dear John exit meeting, the client said to me, he said, Tim, you needed help and you knew it and you wouldn't ask for it.
Mm.
He said, firing you is going to be one of the best things that ever happened to you as an early stage entrepreneur. He said, because Tim, quite honestly, talent is not your problem.
Mm.
And so I said to myself after, I said, well, if talent is not my problem, then what is the problem? And as it turned out, I happened to have gotten some mail from a woman who was a professional speech coach.
Mm-hmm.
He had written the book on Zig Ziglar, who was at the time probably the most pronounced public speaker of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went down to meet with her for a coaching session for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
And in the course of conversation, we're trying to work out different messages that I'd be able to deliver as a professional speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying something, and she said, and I'm Black and she's white. And she said, you know, Tim, when you walked in my office, she said you had a persona and a character that filled the room. She said, and you were so articulate. And I said to myself, here we go again. You're so articulate. You have such poise and you have such a presence about you. And I said, stop. And I said, everybody has told me that all of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And with the exception of my wife, who has never let me get away with any of that charisma and personality and all of that. And the Lord brought it to me I said, I guess I am an egoholic.
Mm-hmm.
And she stopped. She said, Tim, let me tell you something. I said, hear me now. She said, I have heard every kind of speech there is to hear, believe me. She said, but nobody is addressing that topic. That is your spiritual DNA. That is your music. Run with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me tell you the other side of that story. So we're talking about January 2002.
Mm-hmm.
In March 2002, I came back, was in Huntsville, and I had an invitation to speak for a women's group, the Junior League of Huntsville. And for once, I chose to take my wife with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave the speech and it was entertaining. I gave it on egoholism and it was well received. When I got home that evening, my wife said to me, she said, it was a good presentation. She said, but there were 4 things wrong with it. She said, number 1, you were talking to the wrong audience. Talking to a group of women. Women don't have ego problems. Men have ego problems.
Wow. I would think it would be the other way around.
Hold on. Number 2, she said, who are you to talk about ego problems? You're not a professor. You're not a psychologist. You're not a minister. You know, you're none of those professionals who can talk about egos. She said, number 3, she said, what qualifies you to talk? Because you ain't over it. She said, we're used to hearing people, We'll go to a lecture to hear a guy talk about, I used to be a drug addict, or I used to be an alcoholic.
Yeah.
After they have overcome, you haven't overcome anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, number 4, it is nice that you went there, met with that lady, and she gave you this course of action to take and has got you thinking in the right direction. She says, but that's a struggle for you to keep to yourself.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And that cut me deeply.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking outside of our apartment. It was cold, a crisp, cool night in March. And I said to God, I said, Lord, I said, to paraphrase an old hit song, I am torn between 2 lovers. I said, you have given me a message, but my wife is talking reality and pragmatism. How do I find the intersection of those 2 things? Over time and through prayer, God helped me answer each of those questions. Number 1, and as you kind of said, she said, women don't have ego problems. Well, they do.
Yeah.
They do. If we deal with a sense of self, all of us do. There's many times, to be general, borders on the low esteem side. Number 2, I'm not a professor. I have no degrees. I'm not a minister. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any qualifications. The only qualification that I have is I'm talking about me. And most of them, all of them, talk about it from a detached third-person perspective. Number 3, no, I'm not recovered. No, I'm not. Still not. So therefore, I can't talk about being recovered. I can't talk about, like I'm cancer-free. So, no, I am in it. So that's why I stopped talking about recovery, but recovering. And then number 4, God showed me, no. While you are still recovering, tell your story. So it showed me how, in her honesty and pragmatism, she addressed 4 of the issues, and those 4 issues that God took created the book and the ministry. Number 1, we're dealing with big and little, which caused me to make the term egoholism. Number 2, I'm not the professor, I'm the person from the other side of the desk. Number 3, I am not recovered, but recovering. And number 4, the healing is in the revealing.
Explain the difference between recovered and recovering. What does that look like? Okay.
When I hear the word recovery, that is a static condition. That's like a done deal, like an economic recovery. Like like getting stimulus checks. That is the step to aid people, bringing them from where they are to where they need to be. Recovering is a verb. It is a present participle verb. It is an ongoing action. And so I have learned that egoholism, quite honestly, Chastity, is just another fancy word for sin. And recovering is another fancy word for sanctification, which is the work of a lifetime.
I love that. I remember reading that in your book, in the introduction of the book. So reading a little bit about yourself, I saw that during high school, you had all these rewards, and you were just on this high platform, and, something I may need you to talk to my son, because I need him to get there. Like, I want my child to have big honors and, doing really good things in school. But talk about that, because I think sometimes when we have egos, it's like, it makes us feel good when we, when we're part of the elite club or whatever, or you get all these rewards. Talk about, did that lead up to you feeling really good about yourself? Did that lead up to the feelings of being conceited? Like, did that start the process? That's what I'm trying to say. To where you, right before you recognize, hey, I have an issue. But, so I want to talk about a little bit of how the the feelings begin to start in feeling, oh, I'm proud of myself. I'm the bomb. I'm conceited. I wanted to talk about that process of that.
The reality is, Chastity, God has us right where he wants us to be. Mm-hmm. Right where he wants to be, right where he wants you to be, Chastity, right where he wants me to be. And so with that in mind, I don't have a lot of regrets. Mm-hmm. If I have any regret, it was begging my folks and them allowing me to leave faith-based school mm-hmm. and to go to public school. Mm-hmm. Where the discipline is not as strict, where the expectations mm-hmm. are a little bit more loose. Mm. And it's not to castigate public schools, because there are very, very good public schools and there's very, very good schooling. But when you're coming out of a private school environment where Jesus Christ is the center of everything, where your learning is Christocentric, then to leave that environment and to go to public school where the emphasis is upon you being the man, you being the best, that you become the center, you become the standard, then you become not Christocentric, but egocentric. Wow. And so there were opportunities that I had in public school that I did not have in church school. I had a chance, for example, to become a varsity letter athlete in basketball and track. We didn't at that time encourage that level of competitive sports in church school. Wow. I also had the opportunity in public school to become the school and the state oratorical or speaking champion. Didn't have those opportunities. So what began to happen is I took all of that learning out of 9 years of faith-based schooling, and I took it into another environment. And what that did is quite honestly, it dumbed me down. Wow. Because I didn't have to do as much. And I also carried that into college because of the high standards of Seventh-day Adventist Christian education. When I went into another environment, its demands on me were not as strong. And so therefore I began to develop and began to have fed that ego.
Wow. Powerful. Really, really good. So if people would describe you back then, what would they say about Tim? Like, before you made that change, like, what would they say? Like, oh.
This answer is going to shock you. They would say that Tim Allston dealt in spades.
You have to break that down.
SPAIDES.
Okay.
S, selfishness.
Wow. Okay.
P, procrastination. A, arrogance. E, disorganization. No. I, impression mismanagement. I'll come back to that in a second. E, disorganization. E, poor eye contact. And S, selfishness. In terms of the I, the impression mismanagement, I once read a sign on a teacher's wall when I was in college. A little sign up on the wall that said prosperity. Spending money you don't have.
Okay.
Buy things you don't need. To impress people you don't even like. Wow. And that's what I consider to be, that need to feel like you need to impress people. That's what they would have said about me then. Unfortunately, Chastity, people could still make that same claim right now.
Why do you say that?
Because when it comes to egotism, egoholism, it can't be cured. It can't be solved. It can't be eliminated. It can only be managed. I will always be selfish. I will always be a procrastinator. I will always be arrogant. I'll always have poor eye contact. I'll always be disorganized. But thanks be to God, I now have him partnering with me to manage me. The way I look at this, it's very much like the common cold.
Mm-hmm.
We've heard talk over the years about some pharmaceutical company has created a medicine to cure the common cold. That's a lie.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. Every year, you and I are going to catch a cold.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have sniffles. We're going to have runny nose. We're going to have itchy, watery eyes. We're going to have throat problems. We're going to be lethargic.
Mm-hmm.
But through proper medication, sleep, plenty of juices, dressing warmly, that's how we manage our cold.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is common for us to be at church during testimony time and hear people get up and say, God has blessed me. I'm now cancer free. And there's a big amen that goes up. And I sit and listen. But the reality is that's not true.
Mm.
Each of us has cancer cells in us. All of us do. So all of us have cancer. When it gets to that excessive level, that's when we say we have cancer. And therefore, through medication, maybe through chemotherapy, maybe through change of diet, lifestyle, we're able to bring those numbers back down or manage them. This afternoon, the weather was warm here in Huntsville, and I had a chance to go out and cut the grass in my backyard. Cut the grass, to manage the grass.
Yeah.
I can't just cut the grass one time and it's going to be good for the rest of the season. No, I've got to cut that grass on the front and back probably once a week or once every 2 weeks. That's how you manage it. That's what we do with our egos. Look at it this way. The Apostle Paul talks about the thorn in the flesh. We don't know exactly what that is. The thorn in the flesh, it's an ego, it's a sense of self. God allowed him to keep that to keep him humble. That's the same thing God does with us, with our ego problems. So I am still selfish. I'm still a procrastinator. I'm still arrogant. I'm still disorganized. I still have poor eye contact. But thanks be to God, I am now managing. And what that means is the fact that I am now much more aware of those egoholisms in me.
I like that. I like that. So did you lose a lot of friends along the way, or did you have friends that kind of stroke your ego, kind of like add to your ego?
That tolerated me, yes. that did and still do. What is interesting now, Chassie, that you mention it, I remember when I first came upon this discovery of egoholism and egoholism recovering, and telling it to a few friends of mine. They said to me, oh yeah, that's you. And there is a testimonial quote in the book that the person says, unfortunately, Timmy is the right person, the perfect person to write this book. And that person was my mother. Yeah. I don't believe I necessarily lost any. I may have lost friends. I'm sure. I'm sure my ego, I'm sure my low esteem at times and my arrogance drained people and drove them away. I'm sure it did. And yeah, I'll leave it there because I think you've got some other questions to ask.
So how did this impact your family, especially your relationship with God?
Well, it impacted my family because in two ways. That's a very good question. They, like friends, like co-workers, have been tolerating me for these many, many decades. And were pleased in some respects to hear of this observation on my part. Now, here's the other side of it. It has also been my observation that those who will be, how should I say this? Those who will be most opposed to the recovering are those family and friends. Why? Because they've seen me and seen us go through this roller coaster before. It's kind of like being an alcoholic or being a drug addict. You get cleaned up and then you go back. You get cleaned up and you go back. I mean, they've watched the roller coaster. Hopefully, I am on a trajectory of moving forward and not backward. But I also recognize the fact that people get comfortable with you in your addictions.
That's powerful.
I mean, I look at the story of when Jesus healed the man born blind. There's a line in it, and they said, "Is that him?" They said, "Well, it looks like him." I don't think it. Said, "Well, how do you know?" They had gotten used to him being blind. They had gotten very used to him being blind, and everybody is not ready for change.
Wow.
And they want to kind of see if you're going to be real, because then they have to change their life.
Wow.
And sometimes, well, it's just like when you have a relative that you've been praying for, and they accept Christ as their personal savior and become baptized. Because they're on fire now, they start putting pressure on the rest of us. Yeah.
Wow. And what about the relationship with God? Like, how did it affect your relationship with God? When you were going through that ecoholism phase, was it hard to go to God when you needed help? Was it hard to pray about things, or because you wanted to do things yourself? How did that affect your relationship with God?
That's a great question. I'm gonna name you the new Barbara Walters. What's interesting to me, Chastity, is that I feel like you've seen the pictures of being in an operating room in a hospital, and then there are those above who are observing. I just feel like God has been observing, waiting for this boy to finally wake up and turn around. I feel like that's what's been happening. And the more I pray and the more I turn me over to him, the closer we get together. And it has to happen on a daily, minute by minute basis, because I've been in the devil's camp for so long. He's gotten so comfortable. He's not interested in giving up any territory. God wants it all and deserves it all. And so I've just got to be very, very diligent and very vigilant about turning myself over to him. I'm more aware now of my selfishness. I'm more aware of my procrastination. I'm more aware of my arrogance now, because I've said, okay, God, thank you for sparing my life. I'm turning my life over to you. Do with me what you want, and allow me to be a servant to try to help others, because all of us have the same problem. You've just allowed me the privilege to be self-revelatory and share it with others.
Yeah. And I think that's part of our testimonies, like a part of life. We are here to help everybody else. You know, we go through things so that we can help somebody who's going through the same thing. So it's easy for me to tell you how, not saying that I'm overcoming, how I overcame, like you said, but if I'm still recovering, and if I'm like, I may not be where I started, I may be like a little bit ahead, but still working on myself, I'm able to still help somebody get to where I am. You see, if that makes sense.
But you're absolutely right, Cassidy. And here's the beauty of that, is that when you start making those steps toward him, in my next book that deals with step 1 in terms of changing lanes, I talk about truth tellers. Truth tellers are those persons, places, and things that reveal us to us, often in an uncomfortable way. And people and things start telling us who we are and where we are. There are things we didn't know. I mean, here, let me put it this way. Have you ever gone out to buy a new car? Let's say you have your eye on a blue SUV. After you leave the parking lot, the car lot, and you haven't decided to buy it yet, have you ever noticed how it seems like all you see on the road are blue SUVs? Psychologists call that the law of attraction. When you start saying, Lord, work on my selfishness, work on my procrastination, he starts revealing things to us that he may have revealed to us before, but we were not committed to him and or to its recovering. And
Mm-hmm.
people and places and activities and events begin to reveal to us
Mm-hmm.
who we are, but more importantly, Chastity, whose we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So is it like kind of, because I know every now and then I pray for patience with my kids. Like, Lord, please give me patience. And then
That's
it's
good. That's good.
bring it to you. It's like, and it's like, dang, I failed. Maybe this was a test for me to activate that patience. But it's kind of like something like that. God always I think he brings it to our attention, like you said, so that we can try to practice the things that we want to work on. Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was a very, very good point you made about the children. Yeah. We have a 17-year-old daughter, Pray Church. And so that clearly becomes evident on a daily, virtually hourly basis. But in step number 5 of my book, I talk about turn your lemons into lemonade. And the example I use there is of Abraham and Isaac up on the Mount Moriah. And my point there is I call it the Mount Moriah moments. Everything is a test.
Yeah.
Everything. I mean, researchers tell us, Chastity, that the average human being entertains some 2 million thoughts every day. From those 2 million thoughts, we end up making 35,000 decisions every day. And they all boil down to this is a test. God is so good. He weighs and measures each test. There are tests that you will have this week that you could not have handled last month because you've grown, and God has said, just like in the words of evangelist Joyce Myers, new level.
So while reading about your book, it really shocked me to know that egoholism also includes low esteem. And you kind of talked about that earlier, but what you describe as little egoholism, right? Why is that on the same level? Because I hear you talk about, I had ups and downs, and I was egoholism, then you had a little egoholism. So how is that on the same level?
Okay, that's a very good question. Both of them deal with, ego deals with sense of self.
Okay.
When there's too much of us and not enough of God, that's the big ego. When there's too little of us, then that's the low esteem. One of the best examples I can give from the Bible is when Moses sent the 12 spies over into Canaan to spy the land out, and 10 of them came back and they said, we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. Well, the people didn't say that. They viewed themselves, they saw God in the light of their circumstances when they should have seen their circumstances in the light of their God.
I'll say that one more time.
Okay, yeah, I love it.
Good. That is really, really good. Now, y'all, if you listening, write this down.
I wish I could claim credit for it. It came from
so good.
It came from leadership expert Dr. John C. Maxwell, and talking about the 10 spies. He said the problem with them was that they saw their God in the light of their circumstances, when Caleb and Joshua instead saw their circumstances in the light of their God.
Woo!
Yeah. I had to read that a couple of times to make sure I got it right. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, when we look at our circumstances, when we look at God in the light of our circumstances, we say, woe is me. I can't make it, we're grasshoppers in their eyes. But when we look at circumstances in the light of God, we say, this is nothing but a test. So the issue to me of the low esteem and the no esteem, to be really, really honest about it, to me was made most manifest in our immediate former president. To the casual observer, our former president, 45, looked like he had a big ego. But the more I began to listen to him, I began to see that he really had a little ego that he masked with big ego. And that whole example comes out of Adam and Eve. When they first sinned, and the light of righteousness that surrounded them left them, they felt naked and tried to lean to their own understanding and sew for themselves fig leaves. Now, I look at fig leaves, and I, being the writer, have made an acronym of fig leaves.
Okay.
And fig leaves to me are F, forgotten; I, ignored; G, God voids; L, in our lives; E, that we cannot escape; A, that we cannot avoid; V, because we're vulnerable to them; until E, Emmanuel, translated God with us, until E, Emmanuel, S, saves us. So fig leaves, and all of us wear them. I mean, sometimes fig leaves can be anytime we feel estranged or separated from God, we put on fig leaves. They could be getting more degrees. They could be wanting to belong to certain membership organizations and associations. They could be trying to live in certain zip codes. Nothing wrong with that of itself, but there are ways we try to hide and try to cover what we feel is our nakedness. Like God said to Adam and Eve, who said you were naked? Whoever told you you were naked, they're the ones who are controlling your agenda. And so that's what happens to me when we deal with the issue of little egos. And we drain people. We all have friends who never feel that they're good enough or smart enough or can sing well enough or and they drain us. We see them come and we go, oh gee. On the other hand, the other people who are so full of themselves, one person, I quote a lady in my book, said, if you're all wrapped up in yourself, then you are truly overdressed. And so we are drained by both of them because both of them evidence an imbalance that we don't know. We have no ability to balance. Only God knows the correct divine calibrations to balance us with him. That's a work of a lifetime. That's recovering.
So what advice would you give to those who are suffering from little egos? Because sometimes I have confidence where I just don't feel as good. As you know, I don't feel like I'm good enough. Or even with walking in my purpose and with the podcast and stuff, I'm like, oh my God, I go through this routine. Every time I get on, I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this, like every time. And so like, what advice, like, how did you overcome if you dealt with little egoholism? How did you overcome? Like, what things did you do to overcome, like, to get pull yourself out of it? Because when you have that little egoholism or have that little ego or low self-esteem, it puts you in the depression. You feel like crap. You don't feel good about, it's like this dark cloud over your head. How can you pull yourself out, when you're going through the feelings and emotions?
It's the song that you and I grew up singing in church. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust this sweetest frame, but only lean on Jesus. In Christ, the solid rock I stand. All of the ground is sinking sand. I once saw a t-shirt that said, I believe in rock and roll. My foot is on the rock and my name is on the roll. That's the only way, because we have tried everything else. We've tried all the other fig leaves. We've tried to get more degrees. We've tried to move into certain neighborhoods. We've tried to have certain cars. We've tried to, as I said, spend money we don't have, to buy things we don't need, to impress people we don't like. Our only salvation is in Christ, who never changes, who loves us with all of our gifts and our gaffes. So the only solution we have from the big ego and from the little ego is our relationship with him. That's the only solution. It's the only thing that's going to work, Chastity.
I love that.
And we have to pray and ask for. I mean, his Jesus. I mean, what is it? Is it are the Grammys? The Grammys are going on sometime this month. Maybe it's even tonight. It's just, God is like the Grammys, where they say the envelope, please. there is an envelope, Chastity, in heaven with Chastity Cornelius's name on it.
Yes, yes, yes.
All he wants you to do is show up at the Grammy Awards to claim your award. That's all he's asking. I mean, he will do everything he can to save you, everything he can to save me. He has no desire for us to populate hell. And so what we have to do, and why I wrote this book, was to help people understand that the only solution we have, we talk about he's got issues. That's another way of saying ego. She's got issues, yeah. The only solution is Jesus Christ and our relationship with him.
Love it. Love it. And also it's good enough that God would, once we have the relationship, we're able to, like you said, be aware and recognize the things that we have going on within ourselves. And only way we can't change it, because I've tried changing it myself and did not work. The only person can help us is by the help of the Holy Spirit and Jesus. Like you said, have a close relationship with him. You hit that on the nail on the head.
Have you ever had the experience of misplacing a set of keys in the house?
Yeah.
And you
always. My dad would tell you always.
And you tear the house apart looking for them. You do the Sherlock Holmes, try to retrace it, and finally you stop and you say, and you pray.
So let me tell you this. I'm gonna cut you off. Okay. I have learned now to not even stress myself to tear up the whole house. I always stop and pray before. Where are my keys? If I lose something, I always stop and pray, because once I pray, I'm telling you, within like 10 seconds, I have found what I lost. So I don't even search the whole house no more. I just stop and pray. So I'm sorry, I had to cut you off.
No. I appreciate that, because, and that's a very good point. Most of us try to do our own thing, and when we fail, we turn to God to bail us out. What you have done is, as soon as you spot a problem, immediately turn to the solution. And I have learned the fact that sometimes, most times, all God really wants to do with that set of lost keys is just to get our attention, to develop less trust in ourselves and more trust in him.
Yeah, he says, acknowledge him in everything that we do. Everything. I tell you, everything that I do, I have to always go to him.
Yeah.
Everything. I can't.
And that's what he wants. That's what he wants. I mean, the second commandment, and we say it all the time, we forget, God is a jealous God.
Yes.
He wants all the praise, all the honor, all the glory, and justifiably so. And he will do whatever he can to humble us and to put him first in our lives.
Yes. So let's talk about these steps. What did you do to change?
Okay.
What steps did you take? And let's talk about that.
That was a journey, and it's still a journey. Even though the book is entitled 7 Steps, I actually have a bonus of 3 additional steps, and I'll share those with you now.
Yeah, so let's talk about these steps.
Okay. All right. I say the way that we get to our full management, because we can't solve it, we can't cure, we can't eliminate it. We have to take the problem to the top, T-O-P. And one way you take it to the top is, as you said, to our Heavenly Father. But the other T-O-P is an acronym, T, target the problem.
Target the problem.
Not a problem until we call it a problem. We can dance around until this is a problem. Lord, I have a problem. One of my favorite newscasters, retired now, Bob Schieffer, used to be at Face the Nation. Back in 2003, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he said, the biggest problem with having prostate cancer is saying out loud, I have cancer. James Baldwin, the great Black novelist, once said, you cannot fix what you will not face. You cannot fix what you will not. So it's target the problem. Put a bullseye on it. Second step is own the problem. Own the problem. It's the song we grew up singing in Vacation Bible School. It's me, oh Lord, standing in, not my mother, not my father, not my preacher, not my teacher, but it's me. We have got to take responsibility.
Mm.
It's not white folks' problem. It's not the problem of your political affiliation. It's not the problem of whoever typed up your resume. It's you. We play a lot of blame gaming, but that doesn't work. We have to take responsibility for who we are and for whose we are. That's T. That's O. And then the P of top is we must proceed with action.
Okay.
We're not going to just sit around and just have a committee meeting. And we proceed what I call now those 7 steps. Step 1 is to change lanes. And as I like to say, to change lanes effectively, glance back quickly before going forward. I don't believe you need to turn all the way around. We don't need to become nostalgic for our past history. History is important, but it serves as a foundation. You cannot change history. But in order to go forward, you have to glance back to see where you are and keep going ahead. That's why your windshield in the front of your car is 20 to 30 times larger than your rearview mirror. Because what's in front of you is more important than what's behind you. It's also, and I mentioned it earlier, it's also in that step 1 that I introduced the concept of the truth tellers. And truth tellers are those persons, places, or things that reveal us to us, typically in a painful fashion. They reveal us to us. It's also the point when I talk about glancing back before driving forward. You don't need to turn all the way around because too many of us are living off of our past.
Sure.
So therefore, we only glance back just enough, because if you're driving, you turn your head all the way around, it's going to be an accident. So you glance back. Now, we have the benefit of having side view mirrors. Those are the truth tellers. Those are the ones who reveal us. And so one of the best ways to find out about your ego problems is to turn to your truth tellers. Turn to your spouse. Turn to your kids. Turn to your best friends. Turn to your coworkers. Do I have an ego problem? Is my problem standing in the way of our relationship? And if we give them a chance, they'll be honest with us. Most times we don't want to hear it because we already know what the answer is going to be. But if we're determined to get corrected and to get improved, we need to ask those questions and not just ask them one time. Step two says, dig beneath the surface to find the buried treasures. Dig beneath the surface to find the buried treasures. The story I love to tell here is the story of the Italian sculptor Michelangelo. Michelangelo created one of the most famous sculptures we know. That's a sculpture of David. And one time someone asked him, how did you create this magnificent statue of David out of this great big block of marble? And Michelangelo said, David was always in that block of marble. My job was simply to chip away the excess rock.
Wow.
Yeah. When we chip away the excess rock in our lives, we will see beauty and we'll also see problems. And you can't address those until you chip away the excess.
That is powerful. These are some jewels, you guys. Take notes. This is good.
Step 3 says active listening is important. This is the tough one for me.
Oh, me too. I have that issue. Like, for real. If you talk to my husband, he would tell you I have issues with my listening. But that's something I'm working on.
You talk to my wife, she would, and here's the challenge, and it's not entirely your fault, Chastity. It's not entirely my fault. Do you realize in school, throughout our whole school system, we were required to take classes in public speaking, in writing, and in reading. But the most fundamental, basic skill, I don't know of any elementary school, middle, high school, or college that requires a class in listening. And that's part of our problem but the joy of it is the fact that listening, we learned bad habits, but we can unlearn bad habits.
Sure can.
And one of the things I like to talk, my roommate, my freshman year in college, said to me, he said, Tim, you're a very good speaker, but you're a piss poor listener. He said, and when you become a better listener, you'll become a better speaker. And it took me 30 years to learn what he meant. Listening requires humility.
That's the word.
Listening requires us to know that we don't know. And when we don't know, we have to ask. My final point on that is the exact same letters that make up the word listen are the exact same letters that make up the word silent. The exact same letters that make up the word listen are the exact same letters that make up the word silent. Step 4, talk about starting over again, about how we need to become children all over again. Children have a level of honesty and they have a level of lack of pretense about them. And if we need to start all over again, Christ told us in the Bible, except ye become as little children, you will not enter into the kingdom. So we're going to need to start over again with some of those very, very basic kinds of things, that lack of pretense to move ahead. Step 5 says to us that we need to turn our lemons into lemonade.
I heard that all my life. My mom would tell me that. I'd go to her and be like, oh my God, my life is this, my life is that. And she'd be like, no, turn your lemons into lemonade. It's going to be okay.
Yeah. I mean, look at it
all the time.
Look at it this way. Take away his musical ability. Take away his phenomenal dance choreography. What was the most distinguishable thing about Michael Jackson?
You said take away his dance, his what else? Take
away his dance, take away his singing, his music. What was the most distinguishable quality of Michael Jackson?
He was caring. He was a very humbling person.
I mean, in terms of physical characteristics, in terms of his branding.
I'm not sure.
Okay. It wasn't his hat.
It wasn't his hat.
It wasn't his red jacket. It was that single glove.
Oh, yes, the glove. Okay, I didn't think about that.
Yeah, single glove. Now, let me tell you about this. The reason Michael Jackson wore that single glove, he had a disease called vitiligo.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that glove, he used that glove to hide that hand. And that became the most distinguishable thing about his branding, other than his music and his dancing, which were phenomenal. So here was a case where he took his lemon and made lemonade out of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about the glove.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing that yeah. I mean, if you see a person walking down the street tomorrow with one white glove on, you'll immediately think Michael Jackson. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
That's step 5. Step 6 says your healing is in your revealing. Your healing is in your revealing. When you begin the process of healing, it has to be told. When people bought Hillary Clinton's book, and it became the best-selling one-day book in American publishing history, people bought it to read about Monica Lewinsky. But the biggest line in that book was Hillary said that Bill and I decided that we needed to go to counseling if we were going to save this marriage. Immediately from using that statement, there were some 764,000 married couples in the nation that year that go to counseling. And so with that statement, Hillary and Bill became their heroes. She was big enough and humble enough to make that declaration. When Magic Johnson made his statement back in 1991 about having HIV, that triggered an awareness. And we can see throughout history where those kinds of things happen. Your healing is in your revealing. And step 7 says, now that you know, go, elevate, and grow. And what I talk about there is the need to write and share your experiences with others. Put it down on paper or to dictate it into a computer, to write it out. I mean, people need to know your story. People need that healing that can only come from you sharing with them. And so in a nutshell, those are the 7 steps. Actually 10.
Love, love, love it. So if you can look back over your life, if you would change one thing, would you, and why?
When I look at where I am right now, Chastity, and having run for over 40 years, arguably 50 years from God in the ministry that he has given me, and now being at that ministry and now enjoying sharing as I'm sharing with you and your audience, I wouldn't know what I know unless I did what I did. So there is a sense that I would not change anything.
Yes.
Because God, in his loving compassion for me, had a plan for me. And when I abandoned his perfect will, he downshifted into plan B, probably plan C or plan D when it came to me. And I'm living that out now. I can't begin to tell you, Chastity, how exciting it is to have had the privilege of writing this book, 7 Steps to Manage Ego Problems. It's now part of what I plan to be an 8-book series. This book is available to people now free on my website. All I do is go to Tim Allston, 2 L's, timallston.com, and download a free copy of this to share with people because, and I'll admit to you, I can almost guarantee you that 90% of the people that download the book and read the book will never admit to anybody that they've read this book. But that's okay. That's okay. It's about healing by revealing.
Love it. So what advice would you give? What would be your parting words to our audience? What advice would you give those who just, that's not really sure or is having a hard time to, manage their egos or unable to, don't have a place to go? Or what advice would you give someone who's trying to change? I guess that's the question.
Albert Einstein once said that coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. And so what I would say to people who watch this podcast, it is not coincidental that you're watching this podcast. And I pray that you will reach out, download a copy, and begin a healing process in your life that your friends, your family, and your co-workers have been waiting for you to do.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Tim, for coming on with me to talk about this book. Everyone, please go get this book. Like he said, you can download it. I will put more information in the chat. Thank you for being on with us. And this is Chastity with Purposeful Butterfly. And just be humble, stay humble, y'all. And we are out. Thank you for